discussion surrounding House of the Dragon, changing the origin story of Daenerys' dragon eggs, has been one of the most talked about issues with Season 2 Episode 3, among many other details. And while I wasn't exactly thrilled with the implication that 3 of the 4 dragon eggs sent with Rhaena to the Vale are the very same Daenerys is given by Illyrio, the more I thought about it, the more complicated the issue became, and where I found myself in a position where I disliked the implied change, but at the same time began to question if this even counts as a change in the lore. In this video, I'll be looking at the lore we have around Daenerys' dragon eggs, discussing why HBO changed said lore, and even if they technically changed anything at all. But more than that, I want to talk about the inherent need HBO seemed to have for trying to link House of the Dragon back to the main show, Game of Thrones, when honestly, from what many fans seem to express, they really don't need to, and in some ways it's actively damaging the show. At the start of A Game of Thrones, Magister Illyrio is in possession of 3 priceless, petrified dragon eggs. He claims he got them from a shy by the shadow. It isn't clear when or how he came into possession of the eggs. All we can say for sure is that by the time of the main books, they were in Pentos. There is even a lot of debate among fans about how true Illyrio's claim of them coming from a shy even is, and how much we can trust what he says. At Daenerys Targaryen's wedding to Khal Drogo, Magister Illyrio gives her a gift of the eggs. At this stage, it's important to note that the 3 eggs given to Daenerys are described as black, green, and cream gold. After Drogo's death, and the death of his and Daenerys' son, Daenerys places the dragon eggs on her husband's funeral pyre. After the pyre is lit, she walks into the fire, and the eggs hatch into living dragons, the first in centuries. Now, for a very long time, while the specifics of the origins of the eggs were a mystery, many did just assume that they did come from a shy, as claimed by Illyrio. But Fire and Blood introduced new lore that really changed how fans viewed this question. Fire and Blood introduces the character of Elissa Farman, someone who quickly became a fan favourite, given her interesting and unique role in the history of Westeros. She was active during the early reign of King Jaehaerys the Conciliator. She was the daughter of Lord Mark Farman of Fair Isle, and she always seemed to have a love for sailing, exploring, and adventure. In the year 49 AC, Elissa would become one of the favourites of Rhaena Targaryen, once married to Aegon the Young Crown, one of Maegor the Cruel's black brides, an elder sister to the king, who felt her claim to the throne and the rights of her daughters via Aegon were overlooked. Rhaena went on to marry Elissa's brother Andro, but many sources believe this was always sham marriage, and that Rhaena had no love for Andro, with her relationship with Elissa described as much more than friends. Eventually, Rhaena would set up her own court on the island fortress of Dragonstone, with Elissa following her there, eventually becoming close with one of Rhaena's daughters, Rhaena Targaryen. Elissa often spoke of returning to the western seas with the young princess Rhaena. As Elissa was denied the income of Fair Isle by the new Lord Franklin, she petitioned Rhaena for gold sufficient to build a ship at Driftmark that could sail the Sunset Sea. Rhaena denied her request, and a rift thus opened in Elissa and Rhaena's relationship. In 54 AC, Elissa petitioned Rhaena to leave once more and live out her life at sea. Rhaena this time permitted her request, albeit stone-faced with reluctance, while Rhaena Targaryen wept for Elissa. Neither Rhaena or Rhaena knew of Elissa's plans or destination, if she intended to sail out west or across the narrow sea. As she was leaving Dragonstone, Elissa in secret stole 3 dragon eggs from the dragon hatcheries. She departed for Driftmark, where she took a ship to Pentos and made her way overland to Braavos under the name Alice Westhill, and secured an audience with the Sea Lord of Braavos, selling him the eggs she had stolen for an unimaginable amount of gold. With her newfound riches, Elissa financed the building of her carrack, the Sun Chaser. She set sail with a word of caution from the Sea Lord, due to the scandal that the theft of the dragon eggs had caused House Targaryen, almost leading to war between King Jaehaerys and the Sea Lord, only prevented by the intervention of Septon Bath. Septon Bath, the Hand of the King, was sent to Braavos to intervene to investigate the missing dragon eggs. The Sea Lord denied having them, but agreed to reduce the Iron Throne's debt to the Iron Bank of Braavos. An accord was reached and war was avoided, while Elissa Farman went on to have many adventures, attempting to cross the Sunset Sea, with her ship eventually being found in a shy by the shadow by a young Corlys Velaryon many years later. None of that interesting lore is really relevant to this video. The key takeaway here is Elissa stole 3 dragon eggs, taking them across the narrow sea to Braavos, where she sold them to the Sea Lord. Now, the number of dragon eggs Elissa took is really the key here. A clutch of 3. While there are other Targaryen eggs that we do lose track of over time, the stolen clutch being 3 is quite significant. You also have to consider that it's not a huge leap in logic that the eggs could have eventually made their way to Pentos and Illyrio after changing hands several times over 250 years, which gives them plenty of time to become petrified. There is a telling line that also really hints towards these being the same eggs given to Daenerys. After failing to secure the return of the eggs from Braavos, Jaehaerys says the following when dismissing the fears that the eggs could one day hatch away from Dragonstone. He says the following: "Then some spicemonger in Pentos will find himself possessed of 3 very costly stones." A sentence that fits Illyrio all too closely. Now here's the thing, this is just a fan theory with lots of evidence, but a fan theory nonetheless. It's not confirmed. I don't think it's a subject George R.R. Martin will ever confirm. I do think it was his intention when writing this part of Fire and Blood to allude to the eggs being the very same that end up being given to Daenerys, but I don't think we will ever have confirmation of this. For all we really know, the eggs given to Daenerys could actually have been from a shy, as Illyrio claims. So while this is a fan theory, it is one with a fair bit of contextual evidence, and has become widely accepted by the fan community as true and canon. On balance, I do also think that it is true, but it is still very much a theory, and while a widely accepted theory, unlike for example R plus L equals J, the identity of Jon's parents, we cannot exactly call it canon or confirmed unless George R. R. Martin comes out one day and states so. So here is a little complication in this tale. HBO has often confirmed several fan theories on screen, specifically regarding Jon Snow's parents. So many people, despite the book and the HBO shows being 2 different canons, look to the shows for evidence that could prove theories. In this case, House of the Dragon seemed to do this during season 1, when we got to see the dragon Dreamfyre. Now, Dreamfyre was designed to look eerily similar to Daenerys' dragons in Game of Thrones: Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal. Now this is significant because it just so happens it is likely that the clutch of dragon eggs that Elissa Farman stole were in fact laid by Rhaena's own dragon. And who is Rhaena's dragon? None other than Dreamfyre. Thus, many fans took this as confirmation that House of the Dragon were confirming the Elissa Farman theory. And I admit, even I took it like that, given all the evidence we had. Now we fast forward to season 2, episode 3 of House of the Dragon, as Rhaenyra sends Rhaena and her sons off to the Vale. With them goes 4 dragon eggs, 3 of which look eerily similar to Daenerys' eggs. Now at first I really didn't make much of it, and thought it was just a cool Easter egg, as Rhaena does in fact take dragon eggs with her to the Vale in the book, one of which hatches into the dragon morning. After the episode had aired, and the speculation as to if they were meant to be Daenerys' dragon eggs heated up, the director of the episode confirmed in an interview it was the intent of the production for these eggs to be Daenerys's. I guess that means the 4th egg could possibly still hatch into morning on the show, but we will have to wait and see. But if that did happen, it would leave 3. It's also implied that these eggs were laid by Syrax, and not Dreamfyre, which again has confused people even more given the visual similarities between Dreamfyre and Daenerys' dragons, and how Syrax looks very different altogether. Now, this has upset quite a lot of fans. And you know what? I get it. I wasn't exactly thrilled, if I'm being honest, as I really like the Elissa Farman story. But in my review of the episode, I go into detail how that at the end of the day, the show is the show and the book is the book, and they are 2 separate continuities. And I think it's very unlikely we will ever see Elissa Farman on TV. Thus I can understand the appeal of wanting to have an alternative way of explaining the dragon eggs without Elissa. And I guess this makes sense. As much as I prefer the Elissa Farman version, I had to remind myself to take a step back and remember, as much as this theory is accepted by a wide majority of fans as canon in the book, given the sheer amount of evidence for it, it is still just that. A theory, and until George R.R. Martin ever decides to build upon it, it will remain just a theory and never strictly canon. So can we then even really argue it is a change from the book in that regard? I think the jury's out on that one. I'm not even sure myself, But for me, this all comes back to a wider issue of HBO and House of the Dragon, and their insistence on continually trying to link back to the main show. It's not like I think they should pretend Game of Thrones never existed, but I think given the negativity and issues surrounding the last season, including things such as Aegon's prophecy, something that directly relates to the ending of the show that many were so disappointed with, was a huge risk. In this case, I think the eggs are not that deep, and were just intended to be a little Easter egg. Let's face it, there's no on-screen indication they're Daenerys' eggs whatsoever, apart from the colour. So if you're not a fan of this idea, like myself, you can just choose to ignore this aspect, unless on-screen there is a hell of a lot more evidence backing up that they're Daenerys'. And hell, as things stand, if they ever do end up adapting Elissa Farman down the line, they could just simply ignore the eggs in House of the Dragon. Game of Thrones made many retcons like that all the time, as much as it did annoy me. House of the Dragon Season 2 so far has actually got quite a lot of flack from fans for changes made from the source material that do impact the story. And I do actually think a lot of this criticism is fair given the issues a lot of these changes cause within the wider context of the story. But on balance, if you can call the dragon eggs a change from the book's lore, it's not one I really think has that much of an impact, at least as things stand. While I personally don't love it, I think with changes like this, it's best to try and remember that the show and the book are two separate continuities. And just because the show has made these dragon eggs Daenerys's, has no reflection on the books whatsoever.